Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the emerging situation in Yemen. Yemen is undergoing a civil war as a Shiite insurgency based in northern Yemen, the Houthis, sweep through much of the west of the country. The Houthi insurgency is said to be backed by Iran and now controls Yemen's capital Sana'a. The Houthis have been coordinating their offensive throughout the country with army units loyal to Yemen's former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who stepped down from power during the Arab Spring in 2011. The Houthi offensive has forced Yemen's current president, Abd Rabo Mansour Hadi, to flee the country from the southern coastal city of Aden by boat. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, has launched airstrikes against the Houthis in the north of Yemen with backing from Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Sudan, the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait and Qatar. Iran has condemned the airstrikes, however, warning that such an escalation of war would make a peaceful reconciliation within Yemen almost impossible. The fighting, meanwhile, has left large swaths of eastern Yemen without any sort of state control. India, which has thousands of workers in Yemen, mostly nurses, is trying to evacuate them by dispatching 2 ships there. To discuss the spiraling violence in Yemen and its consequences, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Ranjit Gupta, an eminent diplomat. He has served as India's ambassador to North Yemen, Venezuela, Oman, Thailand and Spain, and he was also head of India's representation in Taiwan. Ambassador Ishrat Aziz, another distinguished diplomat. He is one of India's foremost experts in West Asia. He served as India's ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Tunisia and to Brazil. And then we have with us Professor A.K. Pasha. He is professor at the Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has also been director of Maulana Azad Center for Indian Culture in Cairo in Egypt. So I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Ranjit Gupta, let me begin with you. What is driving the conflict in Yemen and who are the main actors? And since Yemen got united only in 1990, North and South Yemen, is that also a factor in this conflict?
I think one thing which people need to understand is that the Houthis, not Houthis really, but the Zaidi Shias, governed Yemen for almost 1,000 years before 1962, when the erstwhile royalist imamate the civil war started against the royalist imamate, and it culminated in 1967 when the Shiite Zaidis were finally defeated. But they always continued to be a thorn in the flesh of the Republican government, which was finally established in 1967. So, and this is not going to end anytime soon. Yemen has been in a state of instability, civil war-like conflict since then, partly against the Shia Houthis and partly against the Southerners, the PDRY, which got united with the rest of Yemen in 1990. So this is an internal civil war, essentially.
Okay. Ambassador Aziz, Ambassador Ranjit Gupta has told us about the relationship of the Houthis with the Zaidi Hashemites who ruled.
Houthi is the leading tribe.
Yeah, so they ruled till 1962. But why is it that you saw the resurgence in the 1990s once again? Yes. Since 67 to 1990, they were pretty quiet. Was it in response to the spread of radical Sunni Islam, Salafi Islam being spread in Yemen?
No, I don't think it's a response to that. It is much more of the reasons behind are the strategic really confrontation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or rather I should say Saudi Arabia and Iran. It is not, to my mind, it is not really a Shia-Sunni conflict. There is a lot of tribalism also in Yemen, which we should not ignore. And Houthis are a tribe more than anything else. So I think we have to be careful in calling it a Shia-Sunni conflict. What is happening is sectarian considerations or sectarianism is being exploited by certain powers outside Yemen, but Yemen will have stability only if you have what I call a peaceful equilibrium between various groups within the country through an electoral contest, which has never happened. And President Saleh was overthrown, partly because what did he represent? I mean, he represented an authoritarian rule.
It's true, but he was also a Zaidi Shia.
Yes.
He was a Zaidi Shia who relied far too much on Saudi Arabian financial assistance. And it is during his time, during his regime, that the Houthis actually became resurgent. So I take your point that it's not a Shia-Sunni thing entirely.
Absolutely.
But why did they rise against him?
Why did they rise against him? Because he was really he was being supported by outside power like Saudi Arabia, like United States. Because don't forget, United States had a lot of interest within Yemen pursuing the Al-Qaeda extremists. So he was very much very close to both Saudi Arabia and to United States, which is really not accepted. The people of Yemen don't want outside interference in their affairs.
You wanted to add something?
Yes, yes. People, I mean, Saudi Arabia and United States, yes, but Yemen was one of the very few Arab countries that very strongly supported Saddam Hussein after the invasion of Kuwait. So at that point of time, of course, he was completely on the opposite side of the fence, not with the United States or Saudi Arabia. And before the Saddam era, his major patron was the USSR. And then Saddam. Then only these people came into
Professor Pasha, the Houthi movement today, of course, is an armed movement, but it began as a peaceful movement. Its head, Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi, who was from Sada, he led a peaceful movement against President Saleh, non-violent movement. So why were the Houthis forced to take up arms?
Well, this is not the first time that the Houthis have taken up arms. When the imamate was overthrown in September 1962, they took up arms, and of all the people, it was the Saudis who supported these so-called royalists against the Egyptian forces which intervened and supported the Republican forces. So Egypt played a very important role to contain Saudi influence, number one. Number two, the present Houthis were actually peacefully demanding whatever they have been so far. But none of the demands were actually met even by Ali Abdullah Saleh.
Well, he launched 6 military operations against them.
When he was president, they had been agitating. But under Saudi pressure, the tables have been turned. Now the Saudis are against the Houthis. For almost 10 years in 60s, they were with them. But now the tables have been turned, and then the Houthis are now in the bad books of Saudi Arabia. But basically now, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was the strongman of Yemen, who united both the North and Communist South, he wanted to remain in power. He was opposed to the GCC formula backed by the Saudis to change him and his brother, and he had his tentacles all over, not just in the military, but also in all structures of the government. He had dominated, he and his tribes. But he was not willing to listen as much as the Saudis wanted, or the Americans for that matter.
We're going to discuss this further, but we need to take a break at this point. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the escalating war in Yemen. Ambassador Ranjit Gupta, why did the Houthis sign an agreement on peace and national partnership only last September? And why did they then abrogate it? Because they had agreed to give up their arms and come into the political process. What went wrong?
The internal situation within Yemen has always been a very complex mix. I think in September, the Houthis hadn't quite realized just how quickly they had advanced and essentially into non-Houthi territory. And I think they felt that there is no need to constrain themselves because all kinds of units under the influence of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who has been president since 1978, decided to support the Houthis against the vice president's government, the former vice president who became the president. So they started growing moustaches, you see, suddenly. They didn't feel the need to be constrained.
So therefore, they filled the vacuum left by the transition process that unseated Abdullah Saleh.
That's right. So they felt that they could fill that vacuum.
So direct result of Arab Spring.
Not direct result of Arab Spring. The villain of the piece is Ali Abdullah Saleh.
Okay.
Since 78, when he came to power, he wants to remain in power.
Yeah.
So he decided to switch sides. Had he not switched sides and become an active supporter of the Houthis would not have been able to do what they have done. Okay. So he is the main villain of the piece.
Still is.
Yes, he is, I'm saying. He is still the main villain of the piece. Until this man is neutralized one way or the other, I'm afraid Yemen is going to be under all kinds of internal problems.
Ambassador Aziz, you know that you earlier said that there's a need for bringing all sort of centers of political gravity, if you like, together. So there is Sunni political Islam, there's the Zaidi Shia current, which has transformed itself into this armed insurgency of the Houthis, this tribal north, and there is the post-colonial, post-socialist south. Now, do you think the individual legitimate concerns can be addressed peacefully? Because Ambassador Ranjit Gupta seems to be suggesting he uses the neutral term, neutralize Abdullah Saleh, whatever that might mean. But is there a peaceful way possible?
Before I answer your question, let me say that what Professor Pasha said confirms what I said. That I mean earlier the royalists who were Shias, they were being supported by a Sunni, I mean the staunchest of Sunni countries in the world. So it is not I mean if we keep looking for Shia-Sunni conflict, we will get nowhere.
I'm merely saying how do you balance Shias, Sunnis, tribals?
Yes, I said that very clearly. In all these countries, not only Yemen, in all these countries there is diversity, there is plurality. There is plurality of religion, there is plurality of tribes, there is plurality of many other kinds. Now, unless you give every identity a chance to get a voice, and that voice can only be given in a democratic system, you will not have end to conflicts. Now, that is $1 million question. How suddenly overnight you can bring it about? You can only bring it about through a period of transition. Now, transition requires time and people get impatient. But to your question, is there any other way other than a democratic process? No, there isn't actually.
Okay. Professor Pasha, now it's not a Shia-Sunni conflict in very clear terms, but it is also perhaps a Shia-Sunni conflict at some level. It's not because Abdullah Saleh's army units, most of them are Sunnis. Okay, yes. So and you have various other actors, the tribals, etc. But my question to you is Yemen really becoming the new focal point of a multinational proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Yes, it is being seen increasingly that way, and also on the ground. Yeah. If you see the statements by the Iranian leadership, yeah. They have been very strident in criticizing the Saudi airstrikes and the various measures.
Well, the US is alleged that they are supplying arms.
Yes, that is also there on the table, but we don't have hard evidence to show that they are arming like they did in Hezbollah, Lebanon, for example, or the Syrian regime, or the Iraqis against the IS. We don't have that hard evidence of direct Iranian supply of weapons. Just as it is being talked about Iranian support to the Shias in Bahrain, it is more in the air. But my point here is the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia has been extended to one more country beyond Bahrain, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Hamas, so on and so forth. Yemen is the latest casualty, but it was in the making for a long time because of constant Saudi interference in Yemeni affairs. Earlier they tried through the Islah party, which did not work. Then they tried through various tribal arrangements. That also has broken down. But now the situation has become so dire after the Arab Spring because many of the youngsters also have joined this Houthi movement who are not actually Shias. And they were hoping for better situation. For example, half of Yemen still doesn't have good drinking water facility.
Absolutely.
The women live in dire poverty in rural areas, and infrastructure is crumbling. In fact, over the last 2 years, more pipelines and infrastructure has been
We're going to discuss those. But let's look at the war effort just now. So Ambassador Aziz, while UAE, Kuwait, Qatar and Bahrain have joined Saudi Arabia, why hasn't Oman joined them?
Oman has a very special relationship with Iran. It has always had, and I do not think it can openly participate in such a venture.
So it's not a GCC unified venture?
No, not really. You must have seen, I mean, the countries which are getting in, which have got participation in this venture, their names have come out, but Oman is clearly missing. And Oman traditionally has followed, even when the Iraq-Iran war was going on, they followed an independent line, somewhat independent of the general GCC.
Okay, I'll come to you. You were saying
not
something?
only throughout, from the time of the Arab Egyptian peace agreement with Israel, Oman has never followed the line of GCC countries or the general Arab thing. It has never broken diplomatic relations with any of these people, irrespective of what happened.
Okay.
And of course, there has been a civil war in Oman itself. The protagonists were from PDRY kind of territory. So Oman cannot get involved in this.
Okay.
There will be a blowback. It's a direct neighbor. Oman has a very, very strategic policy, very well thought out policy. Yeah. So the question does not arise.
All right, thank you.
I was going to say that some of the tribes in South Yemen and Dhofar province of Oman, they straddle this border.
Okay.
Both sides.
Which is what he's saying. But my question to you, quick answer. Please give a quick answer because we're running out of time on this segment. Has Egypt joined the war effort? In what way has it joined?
No, I don't think we can look at Egyptian intervention on the same scale as we saw earlier during Nasir period, because Egypt has its own problems on the Libyan border, in Sinai. It's ongoing civil war virtually in Egypt with the Ikhwan al-Muslimin.
But the Navy is involved, apparently.
The Navy is involved. I don't think they would send forces into Yemen.
It is to secure
or even the Air Force for that matter.
It is to secure the entrance to the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandab, which is a very strategic, because without Bab el-Mandab closed, Suez Canal doesn't function.
Okay.
Well, the Navy has not reached anywhere near Bab el-Mandab. It is coming down. At the moment, it is coming down, and should the Houthis take over the ports, then the Navy probably will intervene.
We're going to discuss that in the next segment, but we need to take a break at this point. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the escalating war in Yemen and its possible consequences. Ambassador Ranjit Gupta, let's change the subject a bit. Which side is the US on? And do you think that the hurried evacuation of US special forces from Yemen has actually hastened the civil war in Yemen? And if this continues, how much of a blow is it to America? And what happens to the US effort, the counterterrorism strategy against Al-Qaeda's branch in Yemen?
The US is becoming increasingly marginalized in many countries of West Asia under Obama's presidency. And I think the US approach is absolutely correct. Its on-the-boots involvement on the ground is not going to achieve results. It is only going to have counterproductive results. So the US is doing well by staying out. Essentially, it is best if the Yemenis could sort out their problems themselves. But if they can't, let the regional players fight it out. And to another issue, I must say, there is absolutely no evidence of any Iranian supply of weapons. Till 6 months ago, all the ports, airports were under the control of the Yemeni government, not Houthis, except Sada. But there was no way a plane could go to Sada. And the Houthi area control was on the Saudi border. So
Sada has been destroyed,
Sada has been, but it has it has an airport which could have been used, but under those circumstances, the question of weapons going there did not arise. So there is a lot of bogey involved in blaming Iran. Yes, there is a competition, there is a rivalry. From tomorrow onwards, of course, now that direct flights have started and all that, it is possible for Iran to supply weapons should it be necessary.
Okay.
But I do not think that Iran plans to get actively involved in this internal conflict.
All right, thank you for pointing that out. Ambassador Aziz,
Yes.
how does the conflict in Yemen affect the rest of the world? And what is the importance of Aden and the state of Bab al-Mandeb for international trade, energy and oil supplies? Is it easy? Is it an easy choke point? Because I'm told, even at its narrowest, it's about 16 kilometers wide.
Well, 16 kilometers is not that wide as waterways go. I think the importance of this conflict is it's indirect really. Some people were fighting within Yemen, it wouldn't matter. But there is external involvement for sure, not necessarily that Iranians are supplying arms. The thing is, for Saudi Arabia, Yemen, what happens in Yemen is critical. It has a very long border of 1800 kilometers. And there is a legacy of problem going back to Taif Treaty when the Saudis defeated Yemen and created the border. Now, the thing is that if developments in Yemen affect Saudi Arabia, it affects the world, because Saudi Arabia is a very key country as far as energy is concerned for the world. So I think that is the importance. The bigger importance is that it is becoming a source of conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Let's keep to the oil trade. Why do we presume that if the Houthis take over,
yes,
that they would not want to benefit from the oil trade and they would choke it? Why would they do it? If you look at their governance strategy, what one is reading is that they actually don't take over governance completely. They just send a minder there and ask the existing officials and state machinery to continue functioning as they were.
No, if the Houthis do that, there will be no problem. But you cannot be certain that once the Houthis have taken over Yemen, they will not create problems for Saudi Arabia. That's the whole problem.
Problems are likely to be on the border. The whole issue of the 3 or 4 Yemeni
not
provinces,
on the maritime side, but on the
not
land
on
border.
the maritime side. It is in nobody's interest to disrupt that trade, and I do not think that is going to be disrupted.
Okay.
In any case, it is not a major thing in terms of oil trade, yes, but not oil trade.
Okay.
So that is another thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to intervene here. There are 2 issues. One, of course, is the lost Yemeni provinces, which all Yemenis are united to regain that. But now there is a 3-way conflict within Yemen. That is the former communist, progressive, then you have the Houthis, and then the Sunnis. It's a 3-way confrontation going on. And the 4th element is the Al-Qaeda, which is now expanding its influence. And this has potential to make Yemen into another Somalia.
Okay.
And the maritime security is of utmost concern for countries like India and various other littoral countries in the Indian Ocean. Because if the government is controlled by the Houthis in Sana'a and bulk of the provinces, the sources of livelihood for the other remaining players will shrink actually.
Okay.
And they would have no other alternative but to resort to this kind of tactics which the Somalis have been pursuing.
Let's change the subject a little bit. How does this conflict impact India? Because India has been coming indirectly, but directly how does it affect us, except that our people are there, thousands of them, and we need to evacuate them?
Our ships might be attacked.
The reality is there is a possibility of a Somalia-like situation developing. As Professor Pasha has quite correctly pointed out, I see the possibility of the South, distinct possibility of the South seceding.
Yeah.
Within the South, there could be a continuing civil war between Al-Qaeda and the government, with a continuing civil war in the rest of the country between the Houthis and the remnants of the government. So in that chaotic situation, we do not want, India does not want another Somalia, because that would affect trade, piracy and this kind of thing. Otherwise, there is no direct impact upon India per se. The numbers of people are small, they are being evacuated. We are not into big time trade or oil relationship with Yemen, so it doesn't affect that. But instability in Yemen, within Yemen is a problem, and much greater the potential instability on the Yemeni-Saudi border, which could become a long-term and difficult problem, not only for India, But for a lot of countries who are dependent on oil in Saudi Arabia, of course, the oil fields are very far away. But stability in Saudi Arabia is a big issue for every country in the world.
Stability in Saudi Arabia or Yemen?
In Saudi Arabia. Okay. If instability starts, if any movement starts to recover those provinces, then that could be a very major. Now that is far away.
Okay, we are running out of time.
I would like to just extend the point.
Quickly, we are running out of time.
Yeah, the instability would not only go to Saudi Arabia but also to Oman. Supposing if the ailing Sultan Qaboos is out of the scene,
Oman.
He hasn't nominated a successor. But there are claims from the Yemeni side over parts of Dhofar. So in that way, it may spill over to the other Arabian coast.
All of us want
very bad for India.
All of us want peaceful settlement of of Yemeni politics. Okay, but my question to you is there anybody today, any player who can impose a military solution on Yemen? And my second question is, do you see the UN stepping in, for example, putting no-fly zones in place, and some other players putting troops on the ground, and the situation actually escalating instead of stabilizing?
Well, I think first of all, I don't see countries far and beyond putting boots on the ground. It will, if you notice, America has been very cautious. It has been sharing intelligence, but beyond that, it hasn't said much. So that's one thing. And I think for us, it is more of a diplomatic dilemma than any other thing, because as you know, we have very vital interests in Saudi Arabia, for example, with such a large Indian community there, and Oman, and even Yemen is a country of long-term strategic interest for us. Don't forget one thing: nobody will try to stop the flow of trade, but just to control a choke point is a significant thing.
Yeah. Okay. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank all my guests, Professor A.K. Pasha, Ambassador Ishrat Aziz, Ambassador Ranjit Gupta for coming here and taking part in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching India's World.